Right.
Good evening, everyone.
Kavalov, how are you?
Excellent, thank you. I didn't do Facebook. A second. Okay.
I don't think you went through Facebook. Oh, okay. It's now doing it.
On the
Sorry.
way. On the way. It's on the way to Dallas.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, here we go. Uh, all right. So yeah, we have to now go to the next chapter and see if it's relevant. If it's not so relevant, we'll just go right to somewhere else here. But we'll see. We'll see what's going on in there. Yeah, okay. I think we can do this. It's sort of relevant. Yeah, okay. So it says over here, Yom Tov, it says in the tour, right? Eno tzarich eruvet chatzerot, v'shitufei mevod. So he says, right, that on Yom Tov, you don't need to make, right, eruv for carrying, purposes, right? As we already mentioned several times, on Yom Tov, you don't need an eruv really to carry. You can carry without an eruv, right? So therefore, there's no purpose, to have one or to make one, whatever. That's one thing. Then, right, he also talks about the eruv of tchumin, right? Which is, I'm sorry, yeah. So that we do need, right? We talked about that also a little bit. We mentioned this before that these are the eruv for the boundaries of the town, right? That we do need. So let me just give you guys a little explanation of what this eruv does. Okay, where's the source for this eruv? We're talking. It's in Masachet Eruvin, right? It's a good place for that topic, right? So what are we talking about there? That there is a prohibition. If you remember, we right spoke about this to leave the town boundaries on Yom Tov and Shabbat. You're not allowed to leave, even if you're not carrying, right? Just carrying your own body. That's good. That's already a prohibition, right? So, uh, but there is a solution for that. Let's say a person, wants to go beyond the boundaries a little bit, right, of the town. So what he does is he places an eruv, which is basically some food, right? You know, right? Always eruv involves food. So same thing over here, right? What he does is he goes out there, to where he wants to go, that direction that he wants to go, and he places there, some food there, and that way, right? That's going to become his dwelling place, right? Quote unquote, as if, right? Whatever. Uh, and therefore he's going to be able to go beyond that another 2,000 amot, right, which is about a kilometer. So that gives you an extension of a kilometer, basically, right, beyond that food that you put there. So that gives you an extension, like you can go a little bit outside the boundaries of the town, a little bit further, right? So it's a whole discussion, but we're not going to get into all the details now. But that's what we're talking, right? That's called erubet tichumin. Yeah, so you don't see this done today very often, by the way. In fact, I don't know anybody who does it. If you know somebody, let me know, right? We'll call the psychologist for him. Have a therapist. We'll give him a therapist, right? So why is that? Because the truth is, right, that the towns that we have today are so large. So we usually don't have any purpose, to leave the boundaries of the town.
What about somebody who like there's two Eruvim that like back up, I don't know, like the Woodside Eruv here to
Right.
the is it because they're connected they're allowed to go from place to place or do they
So we
have
have, we have also here, the same issue, right? In Regal Park Forest Hills, and then we have, on the other side, the Main Street area, right? Flushing, right? So there's two different arrows there going on. There's one on our side, and there's another arrow on the other side. So there's always a question, can I carry from one arrow to another? You know what I mean? And the truth is, that usually you cannot. In other words, just plainly speaking, right? You cannot carry from one eruv to a different eruv because it's a different domain, you know. But this has nothing to do with what we're talking about. We're just talking about going there.
right, that's what I meant. Like if you live on the edge of one Eruv and your friend lives on the other side, can you travel to their house across the Eruvs?
Right. So the thing is, right? Yeah, you can go anywhere you want, as long as you're within the boundaries of the town, pretty much, right? You don't need an eruv for that. It's
Yeah,
just
I mean,
simple.
as I'm saying, if your Eruv, say your Eruv is along one street and then you would have to cross that street to get to the other Eruv,
Yeah, there's no problem with that. Just don't carry.
even on Yom Tov?
But we're talking about Shabbat, right? On Yom Tov, there's no issue, as we said, right? There's no issue with these kinds of eruvs. Okay. Okay. So, right, that's pretty much the way it works. So our towns are so large, like, so, you don't really find somebody who wants to leave the town. Like, like my city over here, like it'll take you probably, like 5 hours to walk from one side of the city to the other, like where are you gonna go, how far are you gonna go, like where are you gonna go. So that's the reason why we don't really, have there's also another thing, which is that, let's say for instance, right, if you guys know my area, right, a little bit, right, so we have here Queens, right, where I live, and then there's Long Island, right, which is not a part of New York City. It's not the same city, right? It's a different jurisdiction, right? Let's put it this way, right? So, why do I tell you that? Because even though, right, you cannot carry from here, from Queens to Long Island, right? Because definitely the arrow will not go that far. There's no question about that on Shabbat, right? But the thing is, that these, right, these places, Queens and Long Island are really connected, by in terms of the housing, like there's no stop. It's a continuum, So basically, right. So if there is no stop and there's housing, like, just consecutive going on, so it doesn't really matter anymore because it's like all populated areas, So therefore, you don't really need an arrow to go from, let's say, from right, like uh, the outermost edge of Queens, right, which is like Roslyn, and you're going from Roslyn, right, so something like that, right, whatever it is, right. I don't remember all the names, but I think Roslyn is Long Island already. There's something before that, right? So to cross over from Queens into Roslyn, it's like it's probably okay. I don't know exactly the topography that's going on there, but right, that's usually that's the way it is in New York City because it's very densely populated. So there aren't a lot of open spaces, So yeah, so that's pretty much the way it works. This issue with the air roofs. Okay, so I guess I've said enough already, right? I don't want to bore you too much with this stuff. Okay, so let's go on. So the reason why I'm saying that is because there is also another way to extend your boundaries, right? Which is that if you have like continuous housing, right, that's going and things like that, right? You don't really need an Arab anymore. That's the basic idea. So therefore, like me, somebody who lives in Queens, like I can go to Brooklyn on Shabbat, I can go, to probably to Roslyn, also to Long Island. I can walk there because there's it's continual housing. Brooklyn is the same city anyway, so it doesn't really matter. But I'm talking about even Roslyn, which is already outside of New York City. Okay, something like that. Okay,
So because it's the same populated area, you could walk there, but you couldn't carry.
right. Yes, it's continual housing. That's what it is. It's, the housing doesn't stop from one area to the other. There's a border there. It's like, but it just keeps on going.
So when we're talking about this area of where you're allowed to go, like outside of your boundaries during Shabbat, like
Sorry, what was
what's
it again? One more time, please.
so we're talking the topic that we're studying now is about the eruv that you set established for where you can travel beyond.
Boundaries, right? Boundaries. Yes, yes, yes.
So there is no boundary in there is no eruv for traveling on Shabbat.
Yeah. So that's what I said. We don't really do it anymore because we don't need it anymore. I
Okay.
mean, in those days, the towns were like really small. You know, it was like pretty much the size of our like neighborhoods that we have today. Those towns. So they really needed that. Because they wanted to go. Let's say to visit their friend. That would be like from for me, right? This area a little bit, right? Regal Park, Forest Hills.
I
So
did.
that's where. But in those days, Regal Park, Forest Hills was a different city. What I mean? Like two different towns. That's the way it was in those days. The towns are very small. Okay, so that's the story, right? That's the way it goes. Okay. So anyway, let's go on, right? I think we understand that a little bit. So וכן הלכות תחומין כתבתי בהלכות Shabbat. So right, it says I already wrote, right? If you want to learn the laws of boundaries, right? So he says look in the laws of Shabbat. It's all there, right? I'm thinking about, by the way, maybe we should learn those laws, laws of Eruvin, maybe a good thing to do. Whatever. I don't know. Just throwing an idea at you. Anyway, so because it is kind of important to understand these things. Um, because carrying on Shabbat is a big deal, it's a big thing. One of the major problems of keeping Shabbat is carrying outside. Okay, Sonia, I'm not going to get too much into it now, but Yom Tov Shechal. Okay, so let's go to Bet Yosef. Okay, so it says here, it brings a source for this, right? Kach elu harif ve'arosh. So it says that's the way the Rif and the Rosh paskind, right? Perek Kama de Betzah, right? In the first perek of Betzah. The Katav Rambam, also Rambam, right? There you go, the big three, right? You guys know, right? I already taught you, right? The big three. You guys know this already, no? Am I right? So, am I? Okay, yeah. So, right, just to recap that in a sentence, right? Uh, in the introduction of the Bet Yosef, he formulates a system, how to paskin halacha. So he says basically, his system was pretty simple. I mean, straightforward. He says, I'm going to go two out of three, the big three, the big three rabbis, right? The Rishonim. Who are they? The Rif, the Rambam, and the Rosh, right? So he paskins like the majority, two out of three, right? Two out of three ain't bad. So we go like two out of three, right? So here we got the big three, right? All of them agreeing on to one thing, right? Which is a good thing, So therefore, obviously, the halacha is going to be like that. Right, the big three. Okay. So uh,
So does the Ramah usually give the third opinion? Or
I'm
no?
sorry, what was
Does when the Ramah gives his opinion, or when they list the Ramah, is that based on the third opinion?
Okay. Yeah, well, the truth is we're not really talking about the third opinion because, in other words, we're saying if the majority, two out of three, right, is saying a certain thing, we go like them.
But I mean, is that
So
does
it's really like two opinions, more or
but
less,
is
right?
the Ramah when they give the Ramah in that like the italics or whatever, is that Is he
Okay, yeah,
giving
it's a good question what you're asking. I want to answer you because this is important to understand. So I got the question. So the thing is like this, right? That I already spoke about this to my friend. I had a chavruta in the afternoon that I learned with. We covered already these things, pretty much extensively. But it's good to cover it with you guys also. Right. So what happened was like this. The history goes like this. Okay, that all of a sudden, right? Maran Bet Yosef, got this brainstorm. He was chosen by Hashem. To write this work. The Bet Yosef, Shulchan Aruch, right? So forth and so on. So he got this brainstorm, to do it all of a sudden, right? And so Hashem set him up, to do this job. He gave him a special angel to help him, right? Who was called the Magid, right? The Magid. This was an angel, right? So whatever. So right. So what happened was that concurrently to that, right? The Raman, he was living in Poland, right? So he also got the same brainstorm, all of a sudden. You know what I mean? He says, you know what? I'm going to write like something like this, like my own Bet Yosef. He didn't know that Maran was writing the Bet Yosef. He wasn't aware of that at that time. I mean, so he started to do his own thing, with the same purpose, same idea, to unify all the right opinions into one, to one halakha. That was the idea, right? So what happened was, right, when he started to do the job, the Rama, by the way, was very young. Do you realize how young he was? He died when he was 39 years old. He passed away. He died a very young man. He never reached the age of 40. Incredible. So can you imagine all that work that he did? He did before the age of 40. That is unbelievable. He wrote a lot of stuff. So, right, anyway, so he was younger than Maran, apparently, right? Maran was a little bit older than him. So what happened was that he found out, that Maran already started to do this job. So once he found out, he kind of like quit. He quit the job. He said, you know what? I'm not going to do copycat, right? Like there are some people doing today copycatting, right? So he says, I'm not going to do that. There's already somebody doing it, so let him do it. You know what I mean? And then he added his own material on top of it. So what happened was, right, that what do you call it? Maran Bet Yosef, when he wrote this work, and also in the introduction, he writes there. He says, I know, he says that the Ashkenazim, the East, European Rabbi, community, right? They have their own customs, whatever. They don't do like us. They don't do like the Sfaradim, we have different customs, right? So their customs are based on what, basically, the Ashkenazim, They're based on Tosfot, the Psak of Tosfot, which was like a big group of rabbis, over several generations. So, right, what happened was that the Rosh, who was the latest, of that chain, right? He was the Ashkenazi rabbi. So he decided, he was always posking, more like the Tosfot. He was favoring more that side because he was Ashkenazi, So that was a natural thing there. So Maran, understanding this, right, phenomenon, he realized, that the Ashkenazim could not accept all his rulings, because, they had different customs over there. They couldn't change their customs like that. It wasn't possible to do that. So he said, that I understand those guys, they do their own thing over there, So he says they can continue to do their thing, I'm not coming here to, to make a revolution here. Okay. So what happened was, right, that's the reason why the Ashkenazim, they had the liberty, to leave their customs the way they were, basically, more or less, That's what they did. So that's what happened, So that's why it turned out to be like that. Right. So what happens is like this, that basically, the Rama gave credence, to the Maran Bet Yosef. In other words, he said, listen, like what you're doing. I get the point. He sent them a letter, He says, listen, I know you know what you're doing. Do your job, and finish it off, and good luck, right? Mazal tov, right? Whatever, right? Everything is good. So he told him, he said, I accept your work. I have no problem with it. We're going to keep our customs, right? It's all good. Everything's going to be good. So that's the reason why, so basically the Rama accepted the basic premise of the Bet Yosef, his basic premises, In other words, also this 2 out of 3 thing, he pretty much accepted that, even though it wasn't his own idea, but he accepted it, So what happened was that, but as we said, right, that there was still room for them, to keep their customs, which were based more on Tosfot, and other rabbis there, from their area, So that's what they did, That's why it turned out like that. So the Ramah is not coming here, to change this plan, of 2 out of 3. What he's doing is he's just bringing the customs, from Europe, that they had over there, just keeping them alive. That's pretty much what it was, But also there are cases you're gonna find, right? If you learn a Bet Yosef longer, right, a long time, Shulchan Aruch, you're gonna see there are also cases that the Rabbah disagrees in terms of the judgment there, how to paskin whatever, just because from his own mind. So it's natural. I mean, look, it's that's the way of the Torah. So that's how it came about, this whole thing. So that's why if you don't see the Ramah arguing with the Shulchan Aruch, right? So the Ashkenazim also should do like the Shulchan Aruch, what I mean? Because the Ramah didn't argue with that. So they only do it differently from the Shulchan Aruch if the Ramah said, that their custom is different. Otherwise, they should also do like the Shulchan Aruch, more or less, right? That's the way it goes. Yeah. Okay, I'm just giving you a quick rundown, right? There's a lot more to talk about, but I can talk about it all night, until the crack of dawn. But we're not here for that, right? No, that's not our purpose. Okay, so we got, as we said, right, the big three over here. They all agree, right? That what do they agree on? Right? Now we have to get back to the original idea. They agree that on Yom Tov you don't need, right, eruv, for carrying, but you do need eruv for going out of your boundary, right? As we said. So that's pretty much the story there. Okay, so he goes on here. Says, I already wrote this chapter, right, which is 518, right, that if he made, right, eruv, right, for carrying, does it really help you in Yom Tov for anything, right? Does it give you any benefit, right, whatsoever? We covered this already, a while ago. I don't recall exactly what we said there, but we need some review, for that, right? Whatever. But anyway, right, the truth is you don't really need it, as we said. You can live without it. But it's still there, like it's not going anywhere. So if you have it up already, and you have the food in somebody's house, so it's all set up anyway. It's there, it's not gonna, they're not gonna remove it just because it's Yom Tov. That's the way it works today. Okay, good. So that's Bet Yosef. Let's go on. So then it goes on here, right? Explain some more things. Besiman Shin Tzadik Zayin nitba'er shekol adam yesh lo ulkelav ulbehemto alpay mama. So as we said, right? He says he's doing some review over here. So how much do you have, right? To carry, not to carry him, so to walk, right? Outside the boundary of the town. So once you get to the boundary of the town, right, you have 2,000 amot more, right, which is about a kilometer, as we said, right, approximately. So you have a kilometer beyond the boundary of the town. That's what you have, without any fix, right? That's normal. בדין בהמת העיר בשור שרואה ופטם והשואל כלים מחברו ושניים ששאלו חלוק או שיש להם בחבית ובהמה בשותפות ואישה ששאלה מים ומלח וכלים מיוחדים לאחד מן האחים ובור של יחיד ומים הנובעים ומי שפירותיו בעיר אחרת או שהפקיד ביד I'm bringing to his fast because I'm going to explain to you ביד אחר ומי שזימן אורחים בעיר אחרת בסימן right tough Tet Zayin, right? So it says if you want to see, right, all the rules about boundaries, right, all the details there, they involve a lot of details, depending on the situation, the predicament, whatever. So it says, look in this chapter, right, which is 516 over there, right, the laws of Eruvin, right, it's covered over there. Okay, so we're not going to get into that, not obviously, right? Nitba'er din Shabbat, right, Yom Tov Asmuchim bedin Shnei Yamim Tovim Shel Galuyot. It's explained over there, right, the laws of Shabbat and Yom Tov when they're together, like, one next to the other, right, and also 2 days of Yom Tov, right, the diaspora, right, all these things are covered over there, right? So refer to that area, right, that chapter. Shnei Yamim Tovim Shel Rosh Hashanah, also Rosh Hashanah, 2 days of Rosh Hashanah, right, regarding the issue of, right, the eruv of the boundaries, as we said. Okay, very good. So that's the story there, right? So let's go to Shulchan Aruch and see how he sets it up here. Yeah, we got to bring this up because it's a new chapter. So let me bring it up. Let me just remember what the chapter was here. This was Taf Kuf Chavchet, 528. Okay. So let's bring that up. Towards the end of here. Yeah, this seems to be the next to last chapter of this topic here. So it says here in Shulchan Aruch, Yom Tov enot tzarich eruv chatzerot b'shut v'mevod. As we said, right? You don't need an eruv, you don't need on Yom Tov eruv to carry. You're good. But you do need, as we said, right, for the boundaries. If you want to go outside the boundaries. Today we don't do that. We don't need it. Whatever, it's all good. So, right, so it says you want to see all the halachot, right? Look over the laws of eruv, right over there. Enjoy yourself, right? Have a good time there. Okay, so that's the story there. Very short, very simple. Let's go to bed. I think this is the last piece over here in the chapter. So it says here in the Torah, Yom Tov shechal liot berev Shabbat. If Yom Tov falls right on the eve of Shabbat, right on Friday, right? En me'arvin lo erubei chatzerot v'lo erubei tichumin. So it says, oh, interesting. Oh, okay. So it says we're not allowed to make the eruv on the Yom Tov. Right? So in other words, you understand what he's saying over here? That you can't make the eruv on Yom Tov because it's a holiday. So even though you're doing it for Shabbat, right? But the problem is you can't do it because it's a Yom Tov. So that means you have to do it on Thursday, the day before, right? That's the only way to do it, pretty much. Nowadays, these Arabs are usually set up, so we don't have to do it every week, they're already done pretty much, Right? How do they do it? They pretty much, right, put some food in somebody's house, and it stays there, whatever. And as long as the food is still intact, but the Arab is still good, But yeah, also, obviously you have to have also the infrastructure, right, for the Arab, which means that you need the string, right, going across, right, all over the place. Otherwise, right, it's not going to help you to put the food there. You need that too, right? But the Arab is really the food, it's not the string. You know what I mean? The string is just the infrastructure.
The string delineates the location, right?
What it does is basically it makes it into a private domain,
So what is our
single
obligation
domain.
in terms of like, should we be checking to make sure that the Eruv is intact before we?
Yeah, so if you have a good VAD, right, and that's the group of rabbis there, who runs the town, so they should be doing that, every week. They should be checking it.
But I mean, how do we find out if it's down? Does that just depend on your community?
So what they do is, right, if you have a good VAD there, right, I don't know who runs the show over there where you live, but I'm sure there's some responsible people there, whatever, right? So what they do is, they drive through, like with a car, and they check, before Shabbat. This is one of the jobs of the VOD.
I'm sure they do, but like if it were to be down and they
So what
post,
they do is, if it's down, they announce it.
you just depend on your community to get that information to you, or
Right?
should we?
They get it to the shuls. They announce it on the internet. God, whatever, right? All the things that they do today. Right? They say the arrow is down. I remember that a couple of times over here. There was a bad winter storm. So like they told us in shul. The arrow is down. Don't carry our sitter home. Things like that. You get the point. That's the way it works. So if it's down, it's down. Okay, it's not
But what if
intact.
it's down on Shabbat?
Yeah. So in other words, the storm knocked it down. So on
Right.
Friday it was already down. So obviously nobody's going to put it up on Shabbat. It's not allowed to do that, right?
Right, but what if like the storm came Saturday morning or Friday night?
Yeah. So then, right, the truth is, we have no reason to assume that it came down unless we know. So I'm going to tell you something that you're familiar with, right? If since you know me, right? The word chazakah, right? You know what that means, right? If you
Yes.
know me, you know chazakah, right? So you understand what I'm saying here? There's a chazakah here. You get my point? So what chazakah means is a presumptive state, right? So in other words, if it's not down, and we didn't see it come down, there's no reason to assume that it came down. So we assume it's still up, unless otherwise proven, right? That's called chazakah. Presumptive state. Okay? So yeah. Okay, so let's go through this, right? To see a bit Yosef. I don't know if we can finish it today, but we'll try. We'll see. Right, so Maskanat the Gemara. So it says the conclusion of the Gemara there. That you're not allowed to make the eruv on Yom Tov, right? As we said. Perek bet the Betzah, right? In the second perek of Betzah. Ted Zayin Amud Bet. Uperesh Rashi. Rashi explains. Right? So he says, why can't you make an eruv, right, to carry? Because it says it looks like you're fixing something. So the rabbis decreed on that. All you're really doing is just putting some food down. So yeah. But anyway, right, the rabbis decreed on that. So he says, what about the boundaries, the area of the boundaries? So it says that's also like, acquisition, like you're acquiring a dwelling place by putting the food there, whatever. So that's the reason why the rabbis decreed not to do this on Yom Tov. All the more so you can't do it on Shabbat, right? Obviously. Okay. Okay, good. So Katav Ran, it says around Dehad in Me'arvin Dafka Kegon Shelo יראה בראשון, אבל אם יראה בראשון, ברגליו בשני שני, מערב ברגליו בשני, וכבר נתבהר על זה בסימן ת"ז. So here, right, he brings a exception to this rule, the Ran. So what is he saying here? He says that which we said, right, we cannot make an eruv on Yom Tov. That's only if he didn't make an eruv, right, berishon, right, which means like the first day, right? But if he did make an eruv the first day, right, me'arev beraglav b'sheni, so then the second day he can make the eruv with his feet. Well, Quran Idbar says we already explained this in that chapter of Eruvin, right? So I'm not exactly sure what he's talking about here. We'd have to look over there, but I think we can skip this now. Right, I'm not really exactly sure what he means by this. I kind of get the idea, but whatever. Anyway, so goes on here. מה שכתב, אבל אם נזכר ביום ראשון בשני ימים טובים של גלויות, יכול לערב עירוב חצות את תנאי שאמר, right? So he also brings us here, right, what we learned yesterday, right? That trick, that very sly trick, that we learned, right? You make a condition, on 2 days of diaspora. If today is Yom Tov, tomorrow is this condition we said yesterday. You can do the same thing also here, to make the eruv for carrying, right? This idea with the same kind of condition, You're using, this like loophole kind of thing here. So if you didn't understand, right, what we said about that yesterday, I'll explain to you. What if if you have any questions, whatever. It's a little bit tricky, but okay. It took me a few times, to read this to understand what it was talking about. A little bit strange. Okay, right. The logic, is not like the usual logic, that we use. Okay, whatever, right? Anyway, so it says here, אבל אם נזכר ביום ראשון, right, as we said, yes, so this is what he's talking about here. So then he says, right, שאמר ביום ראשון, אם היום חול, right, as we said, right, all this stuff. In פרק ב' בצלאל, where is this? In the second parak of בצלאל, the source, right, for this whole halacha, י"ז עמוד א', אמר רב יחיא בר אשי, this rabbi says, אמר רב, name רב, מניח אדם עירובי תחומין ביום טוב לחברו מתנה וכל שכן עירובי תבשינין, ורבא אמר מניח אדם עירובי תבשינין מיום טוב לחברו ומתנה אבל לא עירובי תחומין דלמקנה בטא ביום טוב לא. So he says, right, you can do this when it comes to, there are several opinions here, right? So, right, one says you can do this, as we just mentioned, but then there's another opinion that says you cannot do it when it comes to, right, the boundaries. You cannot do that, this kind of eruv. Why? Because you're acquiring a dwelling place by that. Okay. Anyway, Katua Rifa Rosh. So what did the Rif on the Rosh Paskin right here? Hilchata Kerava Dehu Batra. Again, right, same thing, right? He passes like Rava. Why? Because he's Batra. I'm not going to explain to you what that means, right? You already got that. Okay. So Batra. By the way, is this word Batra, is it Hebrew or Aramaic?
It sounds Aramaic, like
Yes, it's Aramaic, right? So what does it mean, this word, right? It means last, right? Like, in Hebrew it's acharon, right? Acharon. Batra is acharon. So he's the last generation, right? Batra, that's what we call Batra. Like the Gemara, Baal Batra, right? Same thing, right? Okay, good. So you get the idea? Right? So he says that's only regarding, right, as we said, right, the boundaries, the mikne bet tahu, because you're acquiring the right the house, whatever, right, dwelling place. אבל עירובי חצרות דביטול רשות הוא מניח אדם עירובי עירובו בראשון מתנה בלמה אחי. So he says, right, that's how they paskin, that when it comes to the eruv, that we talked about, regarding the like cooking for Shabbat, that you can do, as we said, right, with that condition. But when it comes to, right, the eruv boundaries, there they didn't allow because you're acquiring a dwelling place. Okay, interesting.
Rabbi, in Spanish or Ladino, bata means like the robe. So that like the people that wore the robes,
Oh, that's
Yes.
interesting. Okay. All right. So anyway, yeah, the truth is, right, that there are many words in many languages that come from Aramaic. It's known. Even in my language, Georgian, heavily Aramaic influenced there, my language. And also many other languages as well. Because Aramaic, it was once the most common language in the world. It was like the English of that time, I mean? Everybody knew it, so it was like the universal language. So it influenced everything, Okay, right, that's the story there. So it says, right, enemy the mikne betahu, bitul reshutu maniach adam. So he says also you can do, right, for carrying purposes, right? That eruv on Yom Tov, no problem. Right? As we said, using the condition method, right, that we mentioned, right? Not just regular. Okay, good. מניח אדם מרובה ראשון מצנה בלמה אחי יום האחול בהי ערובה לישתרה lan l'turta b'Shabbat. So it gives you, right, the declaration you make, when you make this conditional eruv, right? If today is Yom Tov, if it's not Yom Tov, right, this whole thing. Well, נתבאר בסימן שכל המסייס. We already explained this in the chapter before. דהיינו דווקא בשני ימים טובים של גלויות. So, as we said, right, this only applies in the 2 days of Yom Tov in the diaspora. Otherwise, this rule does not apply at all. אבל בשני ימים טובים של ראש השנה, אינו יכול לערב על תנאי. When it comes to Rosh Hashanah, as we said, right, you cannot do this. It's one long day, right? We mentioned that yesterday already. Okay. Good. So it goes on here. כתב רמב"ם דווקא בזמן שבית דין מקדשין על פי הראייה. אבל העידנא שבני ארץ ישראל סומכים על החשבון, לפיכך אין מרבים בתנאי בזמן הזה, לא עירובי חצרות. Right, so this is the thing, right? So the Rambam here has a differing opinion here. He says that we can't really do this conditional eruv, that we mentioned. Why is that? Because nowadays, we have a fixed calendar, as we mentioned yesterday, right? So there's no doubt, really, which day is Yom Tov. There's no doubt, So the Rambam is stringent about this, but we don't paskin like the Rambam here. We paskin that it is allowed to do it, but we have here, right, a dissenting opinion of the Rambam, which, by the way, what he says makes sense, like really does, but most of the rabbis didn't agree with him. What can you do? That's the way it goes. Personally, if I was involved with this, I would go like the Rambam because that my head is like going that direction. But whatever, right? It is what it is, right? It's too late now to argue, with these big rabbis, right? It's already been established, so we take it as it is, Okay. So anyway, right? פרק ו' ומבואר בדבריו שם תראו הדין ראובן תבשילין שאין אדם מערב מעצמים ביום טוב בחירו בזמן הזה. So it says, right, the Beit Yosef here, that the Rambam holds like that, in all the eruvs, you cannot do it this way because, the calendar is fixed now. There's no doubt anymore which day is the Yom Tov, which day is not Yom Tov. So here's an interesting thing, right? Now he brings the dissenting opinion right over here. The Ravad Yisigo be'Rav Magid Ta'an be'ad Rambam. So look what he says, right? The Ravad argued with this on the Rambam here, right? And the Rav Magid defended the Rambam, right? Okay, that's no big surprise. והר"ן כתב שאין דברי הרמב"ם מחברים. Oh, look what it says, right? The Ran also says, right? He says the Rambam is not correct here. דרבא דאמר מניח אדם עירוב התבשילין ביום טוב לחברו מתנה מסתברא דלדידי הוא דקאמר ואף אגב דבקינן בקבועה דיירחה וכן בדין כיוון דהשתא לא עבדינן להו אלא משום דשלחו מתם היזהרו במנהג אבותיכם לתלן לחמורי תפי מנהיו. So interesting, right? So he brings the reason here why he doesn't agree with the Rambam. Let's just get this straight, right? This is interesting point over here, really. So he says the reason why we don't go like the Rambam, he says, the Ran, is because in the Talmud, right, it seems to say the opposite. Why is that? So he says, well, let's take a look, right, at what's going on there in the Talmud. So he says, right, that this rabbi who paskined that way there, who was Rava, right, he was talking about himself. In other words, his own predicament, right? Obviously, he's not talking about some theoretical thing, So, okay. So even though they knew how to make the new moon right at that time, but he says nevertheless, right, we don't do it. We don't make the new moon anymore, right? It's all fixed calendar. But you know what it is, right? The rabbis sent, right, some correspondence, from Israel, right, warning the rabbis, outside in diaspora. They told them, they said, you know what? Don't be a wise guy now. Don't think just because you have fixed calendar, now you can, treat the second day as a weekday. You cannot. So since the rabbis warned about this, not to treat the second day as a weekday, you see from there, right, that we have to actually keep this, a second day. So even though technically speaking, it's not a doubt anymore, but we still have to keep it anyway. So it's still, the institution stays in its place. That's what he's saying. Interesting. Interesting argument, you know. It's not so convincing to me. I think, I'll go with the Rambam more, but it is what it is, right? Gotta tell you. Okay. But nice argument. Anyway, right? So goes on. So look what the Ron says, right? This is the conclusion of his argument. He says, since they told us, right, to be careful about this and not to treat the second day as a weekday. So he says, okay, fine, we'll do that. We'll listen to the rabbis, of course. But you know what? We're not going to be more stringent, than they were in the old days. You know what I mean? In other words, what are we going to do now? Let's say to ourselves, well, yeah, we'll be stringent, in both ways. We'll do it as a Yom Tov, but when it comes to this issue, we'll treat it like a weekday, whatever. Right? So no, can't do like that. So in other words, if you're accepting the old custom, the way it was decreed, so you got to go all the way with that. So when you go all the way, it comes out like this. That it's it still has that element of the doubt. Go figure, What can I tell you? It's a hard one. It's a deep discussion here. Whatever. So okay. Right, matnu. So since they were able to do a condition in the old days, right? So we're not going to be more stringent than them, since they want us to keep their system, the way intact, right, the way they wanted. So then we're going to be just like them, right? No better, no worse, right? We're all equal under the law. Yeah. וכן כתב רשב"א בתשובה. That's what it says in Rashba and Tshuva. Oh, look at this, right? שלא נראה לא דברי Rambam. They don't agree with the Rambam. So we have here, right, some rabbis who are against the Rambam here, right? Who is that? The Ravad, right? The Ran, and right, the Rashba, So these are big guys, right? So it looks like they pulled them down, right? They got them down on the ropes in the Rambam here. What can you do, right? That's the way it goes. You can't win them all. Okay. So anyway, right, we're almost done here. So I guess we'll just finish it off. I don't think we should leave the 2 minutes, for next time, right? Let's just finish up chapter here. So it says, Mashkatav Rabbeinu al Divrei Rambam. So that was the Torah said regarding the Rambam, right? But the Nevi are so lokatav ken, right? So it seems like the Rosh also doesn't agree with the Rambam here, right? So we have 4 or 5 big rabbis, against the Rambam here. There's a consensus, היינו מדסתם ככתב, ההיא דמניח אדם עירובי תבשילין, right? So, מיום טוב ולחברו, מתנה ולא חילק בין זמן שמקדשים על פי הראייה. So, the Beit Yosef here explains, right, how the Tur got this idea that the Rosh also agrees, with the other side, right? Not the Rambam. He brings the source for this, right? So he says, he didn't really say this in, explicitly, but since he didn't differentiate between this and that, so you assume, right, that he means it like across the board, for all situations. Okay. The Rif also seems to say like that, right? So we have here, right? They're all ganging up on the Rambam, right? 6 guys over here, right? 6 big rabbis with big muscles, So what can you do, right? That's the way it goes. What can you do? שגם הוא סתם וכתב בדין זה, ולא חילק בין זמן לזמן. So he didn't differentiate. Okay. כתוב בכתבי מערב ישראל, right? It says in this rabbi's books, סימן קצ"ק in chapter, שיש לעשות כדברי האשרי, ובשל סופרים הלך אחר המקל. Oh, so look what he says, right? This rabbi also paskins like that. He says we should do like the Rosh, to be lenient here. Why? So he says because it's only rabbinical, So in rabbinical we go lenient. We go like the lenient opinion, right? There you go, right? לפי מה שכתבתי בכמה רבתה, פליגי עליה הרמב"ם. So it says, right, according to what we said, right, there's several rabbis here arguing with the Rambam. בלאו הכי תמה נמי שפיר דמה למעבד כבתיו. So he says, the conclusion of Beit Yosef, interesting, right? He says not only, right, the majority of the rabbis here are against the Rambam, but he says also the logic goes with them, Okay, well, he seems to agree with them, these rabbis. So there you go, right? So it's sealed, right? It's the fate. Its fate is sealed. Okay, let's see Shulchan Aruch. We're done, right? We're done with this chapter. Okay. This one we already did. Can close this one down. Yeah, this one. Okay, so this is it, right? Yom Tov shechal yot berev Shabbat, right? If Yom Tov falls on Friday, right, as we said, en me'arvin lo be'eruvet chatzot ve'lo be'eruvet techumin. So one thing, as we said, right, you cannot make any eruvs on Yom Tov, generally speaking. Right? So he says in the parentheses here, afilu im hiniach eruv tavshilin. Even if he made right eruv, right for the cooked dishes. Okay, so it goes on. But im niskar b'yom rishon b'sheni yamin tovim shel ganiyot. So now he brings a trick, right, that we do, right, to the slime maneuver that we do. If he remembered, right, on the first day of Yom Tov, on 2 days of diaspora Yom Tov, right, so he can make a condition, right, as we said, right. He makes the eruvin a condition. What's the condition? One more time, right? This is the last time I'm going to tell you. That's it, right? I can't keep telling you forever, Right? So he says, the condition is like this, right? If you remember, right? We said he says like this, right? Declares, if today is Yom Tov, right? I can't make an eruv today, right? And I don't need it either, right? No, I'm good. But if today is weekday, right? I'm going to make the eruv now, and this will be my eruv. That gets him in, right? So now tomorrow he can cook for Shabbat. The next day. That's what we said, right? So he also mentions one more thing here, right? That where can you pull this maneuver, right? For eruv of boundaries, right? I'm sorry, no, just the opposite, right? When it comes to boundaries, you cannot do this. Why can't you do it when boundaries? Because you're acquiring a dwelling place, right? Which the rabbis didn't want you to do that on Yom Tov, right? It's like acquisition, like commerce, whatever. So therefore, the rabbis decreed not to do that. Okay, there you go. We're done with this chapter, right? So it looks like we have one more. We'll see tomorrow, right? What's that about? And accordingly, right, we will proceed. Okay, we will proceed into the promised land, right? As we said, right? So, Bezrat Hashem, we'll see you tomorrow. Thanks for coming. Be blessed with wealth and health and happiness. Laila Tov, Chazak Baruch. We'll see you tomorrow.
Kavod Harav, thank you so much.
All the best. God bless.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Bye.